They say revenge is a dish best served cold. But what happens when the man seeking revenge is supposed to be dead? What happens when the target of that revenge doesn't even know his victim survived? What happens when a single moment of failure creates the most dangerous enemy the underworld has ever seen? Brooklyn, New York. September 1931. Vincent Romano was having the best week of his life. The old boss was finally gone, eliminated in what everyone called the perfect hit. No witnesses, no evidence, no loose ends. Vincent had personally overseen every detail of the operation 2 years earlier, and now he was reaping the rewards. Promotion to underboss, a bigger cut of the profits, respect from men who used to ignore him. Life was good. Vincent had no idea that 200 miles away, a ghost was watching him. A ghost who remembered every face from that night in 1929. A ghost who had spent 2 years planning, calculating, building alliances. A ghost named Lucky Luciano. But Charlie wasn't dead, even though he should have been. Even though Vincent Romano and 3 other men had made absolutely certain he was dead before they drove away from that ditch on Staten Island. 50 stab wounds, throat slashed, hours of bleeding. Nobody survives that. Nobody except the man who would become the most feared name in organized crime. To understand how Lucky Luciano became a ghost hunting for revenge, you need to understand what happened in the 2 years after Vincent Romano left him for dead. Because those 2 years weren't just about recovery, they were about transformation. They were about a man learning that sometimes the most powerful weapon isn't a gun or a knife. Sometimes it's patience. Charlie spent the first 6 months in hiding. Not because he was scared, but because he was smart. The men who tried to kill him thought they'd succeeded, and Charlie wanted to keep it that way. Let them think they'd won. Let them get comfortable. Let them make mistakes. While Vincent Romano was celebrating his promotion and spending his blood money, Charlie was learning everything about the men who had tried to end his life. Vincent Romano wasn't just any hired muscle. He was a specialist. A professional killer who had worked for Salvatore Maranzano for over a decade. Maranzano trusted Vincent with the most sensitive jobs, the ones that required precision and absolute discretion. Vincent was proud of his reputation. He'd never left a job unfinished, never left a witness breathing, until that night on Staten Island. What Vincent didn't know was that Charlie had survived because of something Vincent couldn't have predicted. Medical experts would later call it a miracle. But Charlie knew better. He'd survived because he refused to die, because something inside him, some core of pure will, had kept his heart beating when everything else should have stopped. And that will, that stubborn refusal to quit, was about to become Vincent Romano's worst nightmare. Charlie's recovery took 8 months. 8 months of surgeries, physical therapy, learning to speak again through the scar tissue in his throat. 8 months of lying in bed, staring at the ceiling, planning. By the time Charlie could walk without assistance, he had mapped out every detail of Vincent Romano's life. Where he lived, where he worked, who he trusted, who he loved, what he feared. But Charlie wasn't interested in a quick kill. Anyone could put a bullet in Vincent's head and call it revenge. Charlie wanted something more sophisticated. He wanted Vincent to understand, really understand, what it meant to cross Lucky Luciano. He wanted Vincent to know that some mistakes echo through eternity. The first sign that something was wrong came in March 1931. Vincent's younger brother Tony disappeared on his way home from work, just vanished. No body, no ransom note, no explanation. Tony worked in a legitimate business, had nothing to do with the family operations. His disappearance made no sense. Vincent spent weeks looking for answers, calling in every favor, threatening every contact. Nothing. Tony Romano had simply ceased to exist. The second sign came in May. Vincent's wife Maria started receiving flowers every Tuesday. Beautiful arrangements, always the same white lilies, always with the same note. Thinking of you. No signature, no return address. Maria was terrified. She begged Vincent to move the family, to leave New York entirely. Vincent refused. He wasn't going to run from some anonymous coward who sent flowers to scare women. The third sign was Vincent's accountant. a man named Eddie Torino who handled the books for several of Maranzano's operations. Eddie was found in his office on a Thursday morning, sitting at his desk, appearing to be asleep. Except Eddie Torino was stone-cold dead. Heart attack, the coroner said. Perfectly natural for a man his age. Except Eddie was 34 and in perfect health. Vincent Romano wasn't stupid. 3 incidents, all connected to people in his orbit, all impossible to trace. This wasn't coincidence. This was a message. Someone was playing games, and Vincent had a growing suspicion about who that someone might be. But it was impossible. Charlie Luciano was dead. Vincent had made sure of it personally. But what if he hadn't? What if somehow, impossibly, Charlie had survived? What if the most dangerous man Vincent had ever crossed was not only alive, but hunting him? The thought kept Vincent awake at night, made him jump at shadows, made him check over his shoulder everywhere he went. Because if Charlie Luciano was alive, if he was the one behind these carefully orchestrated disappearances and deaths, then Vincent Romano wasn't just being hunted. He was being systematically destroyed by a man who had already proven he was impossible to kill. Vincent Romano decided he needed answers. If Charlie Luciano was somehow alive, if he was behind this systematic campaign of terror, then Vincent had to know for certain, because living in fear wasn't living at all. It was dying slowly, one sleepless night at a time. Vincent reached out to his most trusted contact, a corrupt police detective named Frank Morrison who had been on Maranzano's payroll for years. Morrison had access to hospital records, morgue files, anything Vincent needed to verify what should have been a simple fact. Charlie Luciano was dead. Had to be dead. Vincent had seen the body, seen the wounds, seen the blood. But Morrison's investigation revealed something that made Vincent's hands shake when he read the report. Kings County Hospital, October 1929. A John Doe brought in with multiple stab wounds and a severed throat. Survived against all medical expectations. Discharged after 2 weeks with no forwarding address. The description matched Charlie perfectly. Height, build, approximate age. Even a distinctive scar on his left hand that Vincent remembered from their brief meeting years earlier. The impossible was true. Charlie Luciano was alive. And if he was alive, then everything Vincent had built, everything he'd gained from that night on Staten Island, was built on a foundation of sand. Because dead men don't seek revenge, but ghosts do. Vincent's paranoia intensified. He started carrying 2 guns instead of 1. He changed his routes to work daily, never taking the same path twice. He hired bodyguards, men he trusted with his life, former soldiers who knew how to watch for trouble. But none of it helped him sleep at night. Because Charlie Luciano wasn't just any enemy. He was a strategist, a planner, someone who thought 10 moves ahead while other men were still figuring out their first move. The psychological warfare continued through the summer of 1931. Vincent's favorite restaurant, the place where he'd eaten dinner twice a week for 5 years, suddenly refused his business. The owner, a man named Giuseppe, who had always treated Vincent like family, wouldn't even make eye contact. Just shook his head and pointed to the door whenever Vincent appeared. Vincent's gambling debts he'd been paying down steadily for months, were suddenly called in full by bookmakers who had previously been patient and understanding. $20,000, due immediately. No extensions, no negotiations. When Vincent asked why the sudden change in terms, the bookmakers just shrugged and said someone had made them an offer they couldn't refuse. His barber, his tailor, his mechanic, one by one. The small business owners who had serviced Vincent's daily life began turning him away. No explanations, no apologies. Just closed doors and averted eyes. Someone was systematically isolating Vincent Romano from his normal world, cutting him off from the routine interactions that make life livable. But the cruelest touch was what happened to Vincent's mother. Rosa Romano was 83 years old, a devout Catholic who had nothing to do with her son's criminal activities. She lived in a small apartment in Little Italy, tended her garden, attended Mass daily, minded her own business. One morning in August, Rosa woke to find her garden destroyed. Every plant uprooted, every flower crushed, the soil scattered across her small patio. But that wasn't the message. The message was what replaced the garden. A single white lily, planted perfectly in the center of the destruction, with a note tied to its stem. Some things grow back stronger after they've been cut down. Rosa Romano called her son in tears, begging him to explain what was happening, why someone would hurt an old woman who had never harmed anyone. Vincent couldn't explain, because explaining would mean admitting that his past had finally caught up with him, that the man he'd tried to kill 2 years earlier was not only alive, but was slowly, methodically destroying everything Vincent cared about. And the worst part was that Vincent couldn't fight back because he couldn't find his enemy. Charlie Luciano had become a shadow, a whisper, a rumor that followed Vincent everywhere he went. Men who had worked with Charlie before his supposed death began asking careful questions about that night on Staten Island. Questions about who had ordered the hit, who had carried it out, who had verified the job was complete. Vincent could see the suspicion growing in their eyes, could feel the ground shifting beneath his feet. Because in the underworld, reputation is everything. And Vincent's reputation was being systematically destroyed by a man who understood that sometimes the most devastating weapon isn't violence. Sometimes it's doubt. Sometimes it's fear. Sometimes it's the slow realization that you're being hunted by someone who has all the time in the world to plan your destruction. By September 1931, Vincent Romano was a broken man. He'd lost weight, lost sleep, lost the confidence that had made him valuable to Salvatore Maranzano. His hands shook when he tried to eat. His voice cracked when he tried to give orders. The other men in Maranzano's organization were starting to whisper among themselves. Vincent Romano, the ice-cold professional killer, was falling apart. And somewhere in the shadows of New York City, Charlie Luciano was watching it all unfold exactly as he'd planned. Because this wasn't about killing Vincent Romano. Any thug with a gun could do that. This was about justice. This was about showing Vincent what it felt like to be helpless, to be hunted, to know that death was coming, but not when or how. When or how. Vincent Romano's story ended on a quiet Tuesday morning in October 1931. His body was found in his apartment, sitting peacefully in his favorite chair, a cup of coffee still warm on the table beside him. The coroner ruled it a heart attack. Natural causes. A young man's heart simply stopped beating from what appeared to be overwhelming stress and fear. There were no signs of violence, no evidence of foul play, no witnesses to anything suspicious. But those who understood the streets knew better. Vincent Romano had been killed by something far more deadly than a knife or a gun. He'd been killed by the slow, methodical destruction of everything that made life worth living. He'd been killed by the knowledge that Charlie Luciano was out there somewhere, watching, waiting, planning. He'd been killed by his own guilty conscience and the terror of knowing that some debts can never be repaid. Charlie Luciano never claimed credit for Vincent Romano's death. He didn't need to. The message was clear to everyone who mattered. Cross Charlie Luciano, try to kill him, leave him for dead in a ditch, and you'll discover that some men are harder to kill than others. You'll discover that revenge isn't always about bullets and blood. Sometimes revenge is about patience, precision, and the slow dismantling of a man's entire world, until there's nothing left but fear. The gangster who tried to dig Charlie Luciano's grave ended up digging his own. And Charlie Luciano, the ghost who refused to die, went on to build an empire that would reshape organized crime forever. Because the most dangerous enemy isn't the one who wants you dead quickly. It's the one who's willing to wait, to plan, to turn your own life into a living nightmare until you beg for the mercy of death. Some graves are dug with shovels. Others are dug with time, fear, and the terrible knowledge that justice always finds a way.